My name is Paul Radensky. I am the Senior Director for Education and Visitor Services here. I'm with my colleagues, Treva Walsh and Aaliyah Shon. And we're going to get started. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. I'm going to turn the floor over to Aaliyah.
Thank you, Paul. And if you mind just sharing the PowerPoint soon, but um, welcome everyone. Good morning. My name is Aaliyah Shon. I am the School and Teachers Programs Coordinator at the Museum of Jewish Heritage, a living memorial to the Holocaust. I'm pleased to welcome all of you to our professional development program, which is Speaking Up, a virtual tour. The Speaking Up exhibition explores aspects of contemporary hate speech through the use of technology, ranging from posters to social media, and proposes various strategies to fight against it. This afternoon, we are joined by Associate Curator Treva Walsh from the museum's Collections and Exhibitions Department. Treva arranged the presentation of our newest exhibition, Speaking Up, Confronting Hate Speech, and was part of the curation team that brought together our 2023 exhibition, Courage to Act, Rescue in Denmark. We are also joined by Paul Radensky, Senior Director for Education and Visitor Services. Paul has organized many professional development programs, including the STAJE seminars. Paul also organizes the museum's Interfaith Living Museum program. Our program today is the second of the Fania Gottsville-Heller and Joseph Heller Professional Development Series and is made possible through the generous sponsorship of Dr. Jacqueline Heller in memory of her parents, Fania Gottsville-Heller and Joseph Heller. This is just one of our many professional development programs for educators, and we hope you will join us for our other programs as well. Upcoming professional development events include elections in the history of the Holocaust and today on November 5th, and our in-person open house for our teachers in grades 4 to 12 on November 11th. And please join us on Sunday, December 15th for Messages from Survivors, One Family's Holocaust Legacy. For more information and to register for any of these events, please go to our website, www.mjhnyc.org, and click events. Please make sure your screen name matches your personal name so that we will have an accurate record for your attendance. After the presentation, there will be time for questions. So throughout the presentation, please feel free to use the chat to input your questions, and we will hopefully address most of them as time permits in the end. At the end of the day today or tomorrow morning, we will send out an evaluation and CTLE credit form. Your feedback is important for us. Please complete the evaluation and return it to us as soon as possible. So now I introduce Treva Walsh and Paul Radensky, who will present our virtual tour.
Thank you very much, Aaliyah. Before Treva speaks, I'm just going to say a word or two just to help orient us. And that is, this is, by the way, the introduction to the exhibition, the entrance. A little bit about hate speech, because this is really the topic that we're talking about, and we should be thinking about it throughout our session this morning. So hate speech is animus towards an individual or a group of individuals on the basis of their group identity. And this is from an expert on this topic, David Simon from Yale University. And the other piece to this, and I'm just showing you a few slides, but I'm just going to speak it through. The other piece to this is that speech, words have power. They can, at minimum, they can cause annoyance, but they can ultimately lead to physical violence and genocide. And that's what we are going to explore today. I'd like to turn the floor over now to Treva, who's going to tell us about the history of this exhibition.
Thank you so much, Paul. So first, welcome to everyone on the Zoom. So happy to be here with you all. My name is Treva Walsh, and as Aaliyah mentioned, I'm the Associate Curator at the museum and the organizer of this presentation of Speaking Up. It's going to be on view for the entirety of the 2024-25 school year. So you'll have plenty of opportunity to bring students, to visit yourself, and we hope that you will. So a little bit about the exhibition history. This exhibition was really chosen in response to the kind of political and cultural moment that we're facing right now. So intense political polarization, extremism, and also rising incidents of anti-Semitism. So in that context, as a curatorial team, we really asked ourselves first, what can we add to this conversation? What are we not seeing? What do we want to, spark in our visitors? And secondly, and very, very importantly, what are our educators telling us that they need? So accordingly, and in response to those two kind of lines of inquiry, we decided that this exhibition, which does address directly anti-Semitism, but takes as its primary topic kind of a sister subject, hate speech, would really be appropriate. And the reason for that is twofold, right? So our goal here in our exhibition program as a whole is not just to teach students, what to think, like teach them the facts, but also to teach them how to think, critical thinking skills. And I know as educators, that is something that you're very, very familiar with. And these skills are perennially useful, but really especially needed in this particular moment. So to that end, we loved this exhibition because it includes many, many primary sources. So words, images that are examples of hate speech from a wide range of contexts, times and places across the world, across the 20th and 21st centuries. And these are really opportunities for symbolic and textual analysis for students to actually learn how to do that work of critical thinking in a number of different contexts. So that brings us kind of to our learning goals for the exhibition, which are 3. So in this exhibition, we hope that our visitors will learn first what hate speech is. As Paul just introduced, the exhibition kind of begins with a definition and also understanding the stakes. So understanding why hate speech is a problem. Secondly, learning how to analyze the rhetorical strategies that hate speech relies on. And finally, learning how to respond. So how to respond to hate speech in productive and effective ways. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Paul to go over some of the key terms that we have in the exhibition.
Thank you very much, Treva, and thank you so much for that background explaining why this is so important now. I want to share some key terms, which I think for you as teachers will be useful in preparing your students to visit this exhibition and will help them get the most out of it. So, and I'm just going to give brief definitions here. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but I think if you review these terms with your students, it'll be helpful. So, genocide is the attempt to eliminate a people and its culture. Nationalism is promoting the culture and political aspirations of a particular group, and that is not necessarily dangerous, but it can be dangerous when it comes at the expense of another group. Racism is the hatred of a group based on the perceived race of the group. Okay. Anti-Semitism is the variety of racism that targets Jews, and prejudice is, let me find my definition, the dislike of a person or a group based on stereotypical ideas about the group. And I think having these concepts in mind will help us navigate the exhibition and get more out of what's going to be what you'll see here. So now I'm turning the floor back to Treva.
Thank you, Paul. And just to remind everyone, we are going to have a Q&A at the end of this session. So you can submit your questions to us, and we will kind of collect them and add them to discussion at the end of the presentation. But to go on to the next slide, if we can, Aaliyah, thank you. So in the sightline, like into the rotunda at the beginning of the exhibition, which you saw in that one of those first slides, like the first image that you see in this exhibition is this propaganda poster. So this is kind of the first of those instances of primary sources that I mentioned in my introduction. And this really is an opportunity for close reading for students to practice reading primary sources. And of course, we're starting here with the Holocaust. That's part of our identity as a Holocaust museum. And we use that as a basis to move into further instances of mass violence and genocide, and the hate speech that kind of supported and was concurrent with those episodes. So when we're looking at this image, I ask students, or any group, what do you notice about this poster? And are you familiar with it? So this is an advertising poster for the film The Eternal Jew, which was a propaganda film released in 1940 in Nazi Germany. It was supposedly, a documentary film, but actually kind of consolidated a lot of the long history of anti-Semitic myths and European folklore into this false narrative about Jewish people. So I ask people to, tell me what you noticed about this poster. And things we talk about are, the use of color, the use of the gaze, right? So the sight lines of the figures in the image. Placement, right? So we see these figures, these Jewish coded figures all over the poster. And ultimately, we always have an interesting discussion, but ultimately what I get us to is that these Jewish coded figures in the poster are being presented as menacing, right? Omnipresent, everywhere, and monstrous. And this is established right through the placement, through the very threatening gazes, and the color, right? The red, the color of their skin, which is kind of reminiscent of like a vampire or a ghostly figure. And ultimately, this is an example of dehumanization. And that is something that we pick up as a rhetorical strategy in the next section of the exhibition. And in many of the instances of hate speech that we cover, we can see how dehumanization is used as a metaphor in order to justify violence against a marginalized group. So I'm gonna, if you could go to the next slide, Aaliyah. So this is another 1940s era propaganda poster. You can see there's some German writing at the bottom, which essentially means behind our enemies, the Jew. So you can see in this poster, there are flags of the Allied nations, and behind them is, again, another figure that through, we talk about details like clothing, how people are portrayed in their physicality, and again, placement, so behind the curtain. All of these very, very particular symbolic and textual strategies through which this particular figure is posed as, threatening, omnipotent, associated with money or decadence. And this is another example, right, of dehumanization. And in all of these cases, there's this comparison made, right, with a group of people or an individual on the basis of their group identity and non-humans. So comparison of a human to non-human. And that metaphor, that comparison is again being used as a justification for violence, for not giving moral consideration to a particular group. So these are just the first two examples of primary sources that we encounter in the exhibition. And they're really kind of a conduit, right? So many of our students have already been prepped and learned about the Holocaust in other spaces in the museum. And this is a moment to take and make connections between that history and some other examples of hate speech and genocide in the 20th century and 21st. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Paul to talk about one of those particular examples of genocide.
Thank you, Treva. Before we go on, can I ask a question?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks. I was wondering if you could talk about the role of media, at least with these two posters, because I know that that's going to come up throughout the exhibition, and I think it would be interesting to think about this for a few minutes while we're here.
Yeah, absolutely. So they're posters, right? So these were created, they're printed publications that were created to disseminate a particular message. And that is something that we can see across multiple forms of media in the exhibition. So our earlier examples, right, early 20th century, we're really focusing in on printed material like these posters. Later in the exhibition, we focus on other forms of media. So that includes like the radio and broadcast media. And eventually we get up to social media and the internet, and that is covered in pretty great detail in this first section of the exhibition. And it's really intentional that we're making this connection, right, from earlier forms of media and like ways of disseminating messages up to the present day, so that we can really like use our critical thinking skills in the same way with messages that we encounter on the internet and in social media as we do in these examples of like earlier propaganda in printed form.
Great, thank you so much. That's really, very, very helpful and helping us sort of as we move forward through this material. So I'm going to pick up on a late 20th century genocide, a couple of them actually, the Rwanda and the Rohingya, and this concept of accusations in the mirror. So let me just, I know this is a lot of text, but let me just talk through it for a second. One of the things that the Nazis did was that in addition to being really masters at printed propaganda, they were also masters in radio propaganda and film. In fact, that first poster that Treva showed was a advertising a film. So they were really good at also using euphemisms to describe what they were doing, so that people wouldn't understand exactly what was going on, but the people in the know did understand what was going on, and that enabled them to take their victims to some degree by surprise, to some degree. So in the case of Rwanda, there's something similar. So and we'll talk a little bit about it in a moment, but when the Rwanda genocide was carried out, there was all kinds of coded language, like the people who carried out the genocide were called upon their colleagues to get to work, for example. Another kind of coded language is this concept which Alison DeForges talks about here, called accusations in the mirror, where you say, if we don't get, they're coming to kill us, so we have to kill them first. So it seems like it is a justified action. I think one of the common denominators here is that in fact that these accusations are way overblown or completely false. But let me jump in and talk a little bit about the Rwanda genocide. And I have to admit that I'm not a big expert on it, but hopefully I'll be able to give a fair introduction to it. Let me also say that the medium that was used for the Rwandan genocide to promote the murder of the Tutsis was the radio, which is actually a connection going back to the Nazis as well, that Hitler was extremely effective in using the radio in terms of rallying his supporters to carry out the Holocaust. This is some pictures of some of the from the exhibition of some of the Hutus on their way to an action. Let me go back here and use this opportunity to talk a little bit about how the genocide took place. Let's think about the radio for a minute also, because today, we all have our cell phones. We have a different way of getting information mostly. I mean, some people still use radio, but it's not as common as it was, say, in the 1990s when the genocide took place, and especially in a place like Rwanda, which did not have as much. Well, even in the 90s, even in the United States, there weren't really a lot of cell phones. So, or in the early 1990s. In any event, the radio was a way of spreading information very quickly to a lot of people. Radios are inexpensive, so they were able to get the message out, unfortunately. This was one of the things that led to the genocide being so devastating. So just a little bit of background about Rwanda. It's a small country in Central Africa. In 1994, after years of fighting and resentment and propaganda, the Hutus, who made up about 85% of the population, rose up and murdered the Tutsi minority, who made up about 15% of the population. And I mentioned, of course, the use of the radio. One of the things that's very important, and it also connects to what Treva was just saying earlier, is that the radio, and specifically the Radio Television Libre de Mille Collines, which is the free radio and television of 1,000 Hills, which was one of the leading radio stations in Rwanda at the time, used dehumanizing language about the Tutsis, calling them cockroaches that had to be destroyed and so on. A little bit more about the genocide. So from the late 19th century to 1962, Rwanda was a European colony. It was first under the control of the Germans and then under the control of the Belgians. The Tutsis had been the ruling class in Rwanda, and this was to some degree reinforced by the Germans and the Belgians, although also at some point the Belgians favored the Hutus, but in any event, it led to a lot of resentment. In the 60s, when the African countries were freeing themselves of the European colonizers, Rwanda did the same thing in the 50s and in the early 60s. And this also gave the opportunity for the Hutu majority to come to power. They established a Hutu-led dictatorship, but there was still fighting back and forth between the Hutus and Tutsis, many of whom who had fled to the neighboring countries. Ultimately, there was a kind of ceasefire that was reached in 1992. Many of the Hutus were unhappy with the ceasefire. And when Rwanda's president was assassinated in April 1994, there was a committee of military leaders who took that opportunity to launch the genocide. The genocide spread throughout the country. Between 500,000 and 1 million Tutsis were brutally murdered. There was a Tutsi rebel group that was, I believe, in one of the neighboring countries. They were able to come and stop the genocide. And from then on, Rwanda had to deal with the incredible problem of how to reconcile these different populations, the Hutus and the remaining Tutsis. So it's an utterly fascinating story. But what's important for us here is that the media that the Hutus used to spread this genocide and how quickly it spread, because we're talking about the genocide started in April 1994, and it stopped in July 1994. And like I said, between 500,000 and 1 million people were murdered in that very, very short time, which is actually also comparable to or similar to what happened in the Holocaust with, for example, the Hungarian Jewry that was murdered in a very short time as well. So anyway, that's one genocide that I don't want to share, but I think it's important to share. I want to talk a little bit about the Rohingya as well, which is another group. This is a issue that's going on now, and let me tell you a little bit about it. So the issue with the Rohingya takes place in Myanmar, which is a Southeast Asian country which borders on Thailand, Laos, China, and Bangladesh. And the majority of the population in Myanmar is Buddhist. There are other ethnic groups there. One of them is called the Rohingya, which is a Muslim group. And there has also been tension in Myanmar for decades between the Rohingya and the majority Buddhist population. There are Buddhist nationalists who have been leading the battle against the Rohingya, calling the Rohingya jihadis, and there is a rebel group there as well. So want to show that the situation is complicated. This is the Buddhist monk. I will probably mispronounce his name, but it's written as Weerathu. And he was one of the people campaigning against the Rohingya. And his method of campaigning, one of the methods is to use Facebook. And I can show you some of the Facebook posts here, calling, the regime. I mean, you can see here some of the horrible things that they're saying. Kalar is a derogatory term. Rakhine is the name of the province in Myanmar where this stuff is all taking place. One of the things I found really extremely distressing is to see this picture of people standing with the sign saying "No Rohingya," and to me, the idea that somebody would say that there shouldn't be a people, it's crazy. It's crazy, and I think something that we should all take a stand against. So so these are two examples: Rwanda, which happened in the 1990s, and the battle, the struggle in Myanmar, which is happening today, and the genocidal actions. One thing I should say, to give it a little more substance. So in October 2016, there was an attack by the Rohingya rebels, and this led to a massive retaliation by the Myanmar military. Excuse me. Since then, the persecution of the Rohingya has increased. About 24,000 Rohingya have been killed, and some 700,000 have been forced to flee. So this is also, arguably a genocide, and it still continues, unfortunately, to this day. And there are others as well that we're not even talking about, but they're going on in other places. So I just wanted to say that this hate speech is not something that's limited to foreign countries. It's not limited to Rwanda or Myanmar, but it is something which continues to happen and also unfortunately happens here in the United States. So now I'm gonna take a breath and hand the mic over to Treva.
Thank you, Paul. That's a perfect segue into our next section. We could get the next slide, please. Thank you. So yes, the first section of the exhibition really focuses on these 5 examples, these 5 global examples of genocide, which we covered 3 of, right? The Holocaust, the Rwandan genocide, and the genocide of the Rohingya. We also, in the exhibition, cover the 1965 and 66 mass killings in Indonesia, which I think is a lesser known example from the 20th century. And then we also cover the genocide of the Yazidi by the Islamic State in the mid-2010s. So we have these 5 examples, all from outside of the United States. But in the next section of the exhibition, we really make the thesis that Americans, the US government, those of us in an American context are equally culpable in having used dehumanizing rhetoric to legitimate violence against groups of people. So this section covers the persecution of numerous marginalized identities in the US, including the Black community, the LGBTQ community, Native Americans, Latino and Hispanic communities, migrants, kind of writ large, and also the Asian American Pacific Islander community, who I'll come back to in a moment. But one of the really, harrowing but important examples of hate speech in the exhibition is included on kind of the back wall. It's one of our other sight lines. It's this mural of George Floyd, which has been defaced, vandalized with a slur, with the N-word, "Lives don't matter." So you can see in this image, the exhibition designers, which they did an amazing job with this show. They came up with this very interesting motif to use to not censor, but to kind of cover up some of the most harmful hate speech in the exhibition, right? So kind of answering this question, like, how do you teach about hate speech? How do you make an exhibition about hate speech without reinscribing all of the harm that comes with these hateful words and images. So they created this motif of the red, black, and yellow slashes to use to cover up parts of the most hateful language and some of the slurs in the exhibition. So we really focus in on this, this piece in general and do some of those same close reading exercises. Like, what was this mural intended to say? What does this graffiti say? How is it used? And what does that mean? And this is accompanied with a really excellent text that was drafted by the National Civil Rights Museum, all about the N-word specifically and the long history of racial violence that word calls in, and why it is so hurtful and so hateful. And really does legitimate the violence against the Black community that we see in this country every day. So if you can move to the next slide. In addition to talking about that word in very great detail and narrowing in on it, the exhibition also directly addresses the long history of white supremacy in this country. So you can see here a Klan rally image. And this is something that kind of figures into this entire section. But I do want to keep us moving because I see the time into the next section. So this is an image from the 2017 Unite the Right rally, which took place in Charlottesville, Virginia. So you, as adults, listeners in the audience, are probably familiar with this image. It was really an iconic photograph taken by a photojournalist that became it was all over the news in 2017 and really became iconic as an image for this moment. But interestingly, when I was testing this exhibition with high school students over the summer, none of them recognized this image. And I thought that was really interesting, right? Because this photograph was taken about 7, 8 years ago now. And it's kind of in that that transitional moment, right, where what were formerly current events are now becoming history, and we have to teach the next generation of young people about this recent history. And that's another thing that I think is really great about this exhibition. It gives us an opportunity to do that. But coming back to the 2017 Unite the Right rally, to just give some context and remind you, this rally was ostensibly organized to protest the removal of a Confederate monument in Charlottesville, Virginia. But so it's relating to that history of anti-Black violence in the United States. This Confederate monument that was put up during the Jim Crow era in the South. But the rally, this Unite the Right rally, became most known, perhaps, for its trademark chant, which was "Jews will not replace us." And that was accompanied by the Nazi phrase, "blood and soil." The rally has really become a huge marker in recent American history and inaugurated a new kind of radical alt-right alliance in the United States. And at the heart of that alliance was this white supremacist narrative that the white race is threatened with extinction by people of color. And not only that, so that anti-Black narrative, anti-POC narrative, but also that people of color are purportedly being controlled and manipulated by Jews. So this is a radical conspiracy theory that combines anti-Semitic and anti-Black stereotypes and is now used to justify violence against both of those groups. If we could move to the next slide, please. So I'm going to come back to that thread in a moment. But now I want to move back to the Asian American Pacific Islander community, who I mentioned kind of at the beginning of the section. So this group faced a huge spike in violence during the COVID-19 pandemic. And that's something that's really highlighted in this section. So when we also make the point that although that was an intense spike in violence in response to the current events, the political situation, as well as the pandemic itself, and the language used around the pandemic. It actually drew on a much, much longer history of anti-Asian sentiment and anti-Asian prejudice in the United States. So you can see at the top of this image some protest photographs from the 2020 era. And on the bottom, you can see a photograph from 1940s on the West Coast that, says that Japanese folks should not be living in this particular neighborhood. This is a white man's neighborhood. And on the bottom right, I don't know if you can see it, it's quite small, there is an advertising poster for pesticide that has a very stereotypical depiction, racist depiction of an Asian figure. So this is not only an example of dehumanization because this figure is being linked with pesticides, but actually, I'm sure you can't see, but the figure is actually eating a rat. So this again is an example of dehumanization. So making this comparison and this connection that a particular group of people is both like equated with pests or equated with dirt, filth, something that needs to be cleaned up, but also that they are disgusting because they are eating something that's not typically associated as food, right? So a rat is considered a pest, it's considered disgusting, and that is like equivocated with the Asian figure. So moving on to the next slide, we make this direct connection and include statistics around the spike in anti-Asian violence during the pandemic. And this, again, it's another example of the really, really great exhibition design and graphic design in the show. And I encourage you to come see the rest of the show and see how it all fits together. But this really is kind of like the central piece in this section on hate speech at home, and making those direct connections between the dehumanizing rhetoric and this violence. So if this exhibition had an overall thesis, it might be that there is this connection between speech and violence, that, as Paul said at the beginning, speech can just be written off as an annoyance or hurt feelings, but very often it is connected with a larger campaign of structural and physical violence.
So I think we're going to show the video now, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay, great. So this is a wonderful, before we start the video, I just want to say that in the next section of the exhibition, the final section, we really cover ways to respond. So that's the third of our learning goals, ways to respond to hate speech in ways that are productive and meaningful. And I really think that this is an excellent transitional point. It's a video from the exhibition in which you'll see, as we play the video, a number of celebrities are using their talents as actors and voice actors to recount the long history of anti-Asian violence in the United States. So with that, we should play the video.
Thanks.
Oh, I'm not sure. I don't think we can hear the sound.
No? Okay. Let me, you can't hear the sound?
Yeah, you may need to stop share and
All right,
share.
let me start. Okay, let me do that again. Okay, sorry about that. Let's try this again. Okay. Share sound. Okay, great. Thank you for pointing that out to me.
Yeah, of course.
Okay, we'll start over again.
On March 16th, 2021, 6 women were among the victims of a horrific shooting in Georgia. They were grandmothers, mothers, daughters, sisters, and wives. They were killed because they were Asian. But anti-Asian violence is not new. It is part of our collective memory.
As the families in Georgia mourn and memorialize the lives of their loved ones, we remember the history of racism our community has faced. In 1875, the PAGE Act passes, banning Chinese women from entering the United States. It's the first federal law to limit immigration.
In 1882, the Chinese Exclusion Act passes, prohibiting Asian immigrants from becoming U.S. citizens. Its discriminatory practices survive for over 80 years. In 1885, 28 Chinese Americans are lynched and murdered in Rock Springs, Wyoming.
1930. Across California, hundreds of Filipino-American farm workers injured and scores killed by rioters. 1942. 120,000 Japanese Americans incarcerated in concentration camps by our own government.
1982. Vincent Chin beat to death by two men with a baseball bat right before his wedding. Mistaken for being Japanese, accused of stealing their jobs. 1989, 5 Vietnamese and Cambodian children killed, more than 30 wounded. Stockton, California.
In the wake of September 11, 2001, attacks against Muslims and South Asians surge. 2012, 6 Sikh Americans killed in a temple in Oak Creek, Wisconsin.
This past year, almost 4,000 incidents of anti-Asian violence, including murders of our elders simply walking in their own neighborhoods.
Memory is the antidote to death. Solidarity is the answer to silence.
As activist Valerie Kaur once asked, what if this is not the darkness of the tomb, but the darkness of the womb?
Today, we birth something new, knowing it's up to all of us to keep each other safe and shine a light together.
So this is a really effective and moving video, as I'm sure you all are feeling right now. And as we talk about different ways to respond and to manage your response to hate speech, so one thing that we really want to point out and empower our visitors with is the fact that media and social media are tools, right? And they can be used to spread hateful messages, but they can also be used to spread empowering and effective messages, messages that cancel out or cover up the effects of hate speech. So there are a few other examples of this in the exhibition, but I think this one is really, really good. I mean, the way that you're using celebrity, right, really effectively to catch people's attention. You're, using the talent of those actors to effectively and grab our attention and convey the messages of these many, many, many histories that they cover in just a few minutes. And then, the production, the black and white, the candles, all the writing, you can really use, the tools the tools of social media and the kind of forms and symbols and strategies to spread positive messages if you are very intentional about it. So I know that that hopefully will set you up well for your next section, Paul. What is the next slide?
I'm trying to get there. Let's see here. Maybe I have to go out of this. Okay, hold on one second. Should be able to go out. Okay. Let's try it again. Okay. Okay. Okay, bear with us 1 second while we figure this out. Okay. Okay. Okay, Treva. I think you're up.
Okay, great. Okay, so to come back to that thread I left off with about the Unite the Right 2017 rally, if you could move to the next slide. So we spoke about the kind of radical replacement, great replacement theory. So this idea, this white supremacist narrative that the white race is threatened with extinction by people of color who are being controlled and manipulated by Jews. The effects of this conspiracy theory came home to the museum in January of 2021. So this was actually just the day after January 6th, when a Confederate flag was tied to the museum's front door. So you can see a security camera image of that act taking place on the left here. You can see the person who is tying the flag to the front door of the museum. This took place overnight, and museum staff came to work the next day to find that this had happened. And then on the left, on the right, you can see an image of the perpetrators. And this image was actually posted by the perpetrators on social media, bragging about what they had done. So although this kind of like symbolic type of violence might seem insignificant or simple, right, just words, just a flag tied to the front door, it was really threatening for many of the museum staff who were on site at the time. And you can remember the really, really fractious moment that we were in January 2021. There was really widespread violence, not just in Washington, D.C., but all over the country. And it was, very, very nerve-wracking to fear further escalation and violent attacks at your workplace. So, this was reported to security, to the police. Nothing ever happened, even though the perpetrators had taken responsibility and bragged about it on social media. And this incident happened over 3 years ago. So as a museum, we decided to take the opportunity of this exhibition to create a panel that tells this story for ourselves for the first time. And this is the first time we've really been able to reflect on this incident as a community and tell our story in retrospect. It was an opportunity for us to kind of come together to reflect on this incident of harassment and also to reframe it, right? And to contextualize it within our shared community narrative. And the reason that we included this story in the last section of the exhibition is that memorialization and telling one's own story, as was done in the video that you just saw, as we were doing in this panel, is just one way among many to respond to hate speech. And so we build on those strategies in the rest of the section, which Paul will take on.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Treva. It is as I look at these pictures, it is kind of it is frightening. Thank God nothing else happened after this. But when you think about the context and the fact that perhaps something could have happened, it is kind of scary to consider. So, thank you for sharing that. The end of the exhibition, or towards the end of the exhibition, it's not exactly the end, but just before the end, the penultimate section of the exhibition is, what can we do about hate speech? And one thing that's important to keep in mind, and that the exhibition does a good job explaining, is that most hate speech is considered political speech, and in the United States it is therefore protected. So people can legally say hateful things So these things then need to be fought against by other means. And the exhibition does a good job of presenting various strategies to fight against hate speech. So I think and I hope you all will come and visit the exhibition and see for yourself. This is sort of my interpretation of how the exhibition presents this material. So one thing is to be an upstander, and to protest hate speech, to push back against hate speech, to demand from elected officials that they protest hate speech and they reject it, and really to be a presence and an ally, because you know, hate speech can happen to any group, and it's my feeling that we're all in this together on some level, and therefore if something hateful happens towards somebody else, we all have to stand up in support of that person or that group, and not wait till hate speech happens or something hateful happens just to us. So we should really all strive to be an upstander against hateful actions and hate speech wherever they occur. Another way of fighting against hate speech is by teaching tolerance and respect. And I like the idea of respect, that all of us, we all have a right to be here. We all deserve, as human beings, respect. And the exhibition points out that this could be done specifically or broadly. Another point which I thought the exhibition was really insightful about was to get to know your neighbors. One of the speakers, I believe his name is Eric Ward, in the exhibition mentioned that the people who are promoting this hate speech, they're not some people out there that we don't know. These are our neighbors. These are the people we go shopping with. These are the people whose children go to our schools, and so on. So if we get to know people, and if they get to know us, then chances are those kinds of negative stereotypes will be lessened, because once you know a person, you see them for who they are as a person and not just the stereotype. So I think that that's really super important. And if we see people as people, where it'll be much harder for us to dehumanize them and for them to dehumanize us as well. And along these lines, we have to keep these things in mind, getting to know one another through education and being aware of what's going on around us, so that we can intervene in a timely fashion. These are just some of the strategies that are really important in terms of hate speech and fighting against hate speech. There's a lot more here. There's a lot more in the exhibition. So I really invite you all to come and look at it on your own. I just wanted to say a couple words, and then we wanted to show an image from some of the slides that we have at the very end of the exhibition, which shows some examples of contemporary anti-Semitic hate speech. But and I'll show this here. These are just a few of the examples of things that are really going around today. These are really all very current. I believe I guess some of them are not post COVID, but nevertheless things that are pretty much out there. And this is just a small sample of really dozens of anti-Semitic posters and signs that have been collected by the museum. And this is only of one group. There are also lots of, as we saw in the exhibition, lots of hateful posters and signs towards other groups as well. So we really all need to fight against this. We have to be aware of all forms of hate speech in order to battle it, so that we can hopefully eradicate it. So we have a few minutes, not a lot, and I know we promised to end by 11, but if there's any questions, we'd be really happy to try to entertain them. I'm going to stop the share right now. But please, if you have a question, please send it in the chat. Okay, I see we do have some questions in the chat already, so that's fantastic. Thank you so much.
Yeah, there was a really nice question, a couple that came in recently. One about how anti-Semitism is covered in the exhibition. So I want to address that. And then there was another interesting one about legalism, but I'm not sure we'll get to it. I think it was answered by Paul after it was asked. So as far as how we cover anti-Semitism in this exhibition, as Paul mentioned, at the very end of the exhibition, like the ultimate moment, is this really massive slideshow of examples of contemporary anti-Semitic hate speech. So these range, I think the earliest is from 2017, but they are as recently as a couple of months ago. And the reason we chose a slideshow for this part of the exhibition is that a slideshow, as compared to like a printed panel that's on the wall, is something that we can iterate on and add to during the run of the exhibition. So as you can imagine, exhibitions are planned long in advance, often years in advance. And that made it really difficult to be able to choose examples because we didn't know, back in January of this year, what was going to happen in the summer, what was going to happen in the fall, or what would happen, next spring. So we wouldn't be able to include those examples unless we chose a digital format like this slideshow. And really, we have a profusion of different examples, right, coming from all across the political spectrum, showing how these kind of forms of rhetoric, anti-Semitism, shows up in all kinds of political speech. And really, they are, again, primary sources that we use to apply all of the rhetorical analysis and symbolic analysis skills that students learn in the first section of the exhibition and apply them in the context of contemporary anti-Semitism. So it really is a moment to think about the stakes of hate speech, especially in this moment today, and to come back to our context as a Holocaust museum. And so you'll notice there's a huge range of identities that are covered in this exhibition. And in some ways, we sacrifice depth for breadth, right? None of these histories are covered to the point of exhaustion in the show. And we do that because it really allows us, or because our exhibition program allows us to. So this show is in the context of two other exhibitions, which are very, very massive kind of blockbuster exhibitions that are very detailed about Holocaust history. So that's our core exhibition on the Holocaust, What Hate Can Do, and our exhibition for children called Courage to Act, Rescue in Denmark. And we are really, really fortunate as a museum to have a lot of space and to have those two huge exhibitions, because in our smaller temporary exhibition space, we can do something like this that is more kind of both more inclusive and more skills-based, right? Focused on critical thinking, skills building, and connecting into the contemporary moment. And I'm sure Paul has something more to add about it too, but I know we're close to time.
We're close to time, yeah. Just a couple comments. So first of all, these are fantastic comments that you have submitted, and it's fantastic questions. Just a couple things. First of all, one of the teachers suggested that we should have included maps. So that's a great suggestion. Thank you for that. The other question I just wanted to address very briefly is that current events, we're still figuring out how to present that. And as Treva just said earlier, there's some sort of transition between when something is a current event and something is history. And as the museum that deals really with history, we're trying to address that as much as we can. And we'll still try to figure out the current events, but it's much harder to present those in a thoughtful way and in a fair way. So that's a short answer to, it's a big and important question. But it's not that those current events aren't on our minds, but that we have to sort of figure out how they can be best addressed and when they can be best addressed. So thank you for those questions. I'm going to turn the floor over now to Aaliyah, who's going to wrap things up for us. I just want to take a moment to thank Treva for spending all this time and preparing this fantastic presentation, to Aaliyah, who also spent a lot of time preparing everything and prepared the PowerPoint. And I want to wish everybody a great day. And now I turn the floor over to Aaliyah.
Thank you. And thank you to you and Treva for your time and presence today. And thank you all for joining us today. After the program, I will send out an evaluation and CTLE application to those who are here with us today. And please join us for the upcoming professional development events that include the elections in the history of the Holocaust and today on November 5th, which is next week. And on November 11th, which is our in-person event, which is the open house for teachers in grades 4 to 12 here at the museum. And please join us also on Sunday, December 15th for Messages from Survivors, One Family's Holocaust Legacy. So for more information and to register for any of these events, please go to our website at www.mjhnyc.org and click on events. And if you have any other questions, you can also email to education@mjhnyc.org.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Treva. Thank you, Aaliyah. I want to wish everybody a great day and look forward to seeing you at our next professional development event.